I want to really engage you in a review of a journey that started at age 11 when I was first introduced to agricultural science. I went to one of only 2 schools in Trinidad and Tobago that did agricultural science at GC. I actually have a agricultural science pass at Cambridge O-level in agriculture. But the important thing was that I went to a school where I had a plot of land from Form 1. And that plot of land was invested in me up until 5th form when I left the school. And that started my engagement with agriculture. I'm taking you down this lane to tell you that it takes a certain amount of temerity to feel that you could develop a global tool. I mean, it comes a certain amount of arrogance and temerity too. So that I've had a really, really long engagement with the sector. My first involvement with climate change to be part of something called C-SAC, which was the Caribbean Planning for Adaptation to Climate Change. This is way back in 1998 when there were a lot of naysayers about, and people were saying, oh, this climate change thing is only old talk, you know, it's just cycles, you know. I mean, every 1,000 years they have cycles like these where the weather behaves, you know, the climate behaves arbitrarily. And even at that stage, it dawned on me that I should worry. Because if it's every 1,000 years, in this 1,000th year, you know, I'm still alive, you know, I mean, I should be worried now, you know. I couldn't care less whether it was every 1,000 years or not. And because of that involvement with C-SAC, I met Neville Trucks. When we started C-SAC, I remember that as the only voice of agriculture on that planning committee, we organized the very first agriculture and water risk management seminar. It was, if I remember correctly, it was at Cape Up, and I was asked to lead that, and Dr. Ford was asked to lead the water end of it. So as early as 2002, we were actually looking at the implications of climate change to agriculture, not just Caribbean agriculture. There was a lot of talk about the differences between C4 plants and C3 plants, and the fact that all this extra carbon dioxide may be a good thing. So why worry? So that my involvement with agriculture and climate change, as I say, goes back about 18 years. Now, in about 2004, FAO in its wisdom, but primarily through Listra, decided that they would hire me to do a project on cost effectiveness of mitigation efforts. I'm telling you this to say that I came out of a 10-year career in agricultural banking, development banking. And one of the reasons why I switched from being a plant pathologist per se to a farm manager is I realized that the issues in agriculture were so broad that in narrow confines of plant pathology, even when you're working in a bank and when people could afford your recommendations, didn't really solve all the problems. So you needed a much more holistic perspective. And that is something that I'm going to stress on when I talk about the tool itself. This willingness to expand beyond the traditional boundaries, not just the disciplinary boundaries, but in the sector boundaries. Because I always saw agriculture as being the fate of the Caribbean. And if I can do a plug for my company here, that's the tagline for my company, where we positively influence the fate of the Caribbean, where fate stands for food, agriculture, tourism, and environment. So from as early as 1994, when I launched this company, you know, that was at the forefront of my mind. And then for about 3 consecutive years, I was part of what Wesley referred to, the Caribbean Week of Agriculture. I managed the climate change aspects of those proceedings, including the e-consultations, etc., etc., etc. And then for COP17, which predates the very famous COP21 by 4 years, I was the Caribbean representative asked to assist FANRAPAN. We were there trying to get agriculture, listen to me carefully, trying to get agriculture onto the climate change agenda at these conferences of the parties. So that when I look back at what happened at COP21. It took that long to get agriculture almost, because it isn't fully mainstreamed yet, almost mainstreamed into climate change mitigation and adaptation work. Because as agriculture is perceived as one of the causes, etc., there was always this struggle to get agriculture seen as a major adaptive and mitigative tool in terms of our approach to climate change. Now, I got a lot of these Caribbean-wide climate smart agriculture consultancies. And I had an opportunity to move through the entire Caribbean and look at what was morphing into this whole business that FAO sort of took under its wing as climate smart agriculture. But we were looking at sustainable development approaches. I mean, I go back as far back as the days of LISA. I don't know how many of you remember LISA, LEISA. Low external input sustainable agriculture. Winston, you're the only one nodding, and that dates you. But we won't get into that. So that my experience with agriculture's response to climate change is not an overnight thing. And I put a lot of that experience and those perspectives into this tool that I'm about to describe. And I was again fortunate enough to be on the board of WINFA, which at the time was the largest farmers organization in the Caribbean, for 10 years. And in those 10 years, we were able to see the introduction of fair trade into the Caribbean. And I remember at one of those early meetings, even before fair trade was popularized, if you want to use that term, you still had Max Havre and a whole range of other so-called private standards. So that my background in standards, especially environmental standards, goes back to those days and to Green Globe Consulting, because as you heard, the company dealt with FATE, which is Food, Agriculture, Tourism and Environment. So that I've had a fairly long history in environmental consulting from the tourism aspect, which is something called Green Globe. And Green Globe is a similar type of standard and auditing feature that has been credited with greening, and I'm going to use this term under advice, greening of the tourism product. Okay, we're going to have these categories of compliance. Because what bothered me from the very beginning, and because I was part of a lot of the initial funding for some of these projects as well, is the fact that one sparrow does not a summer way. I really did not want to see the type of unidimensional projects get funded. So that I could easily see, and I'm just telling tales out of school, because I've actually seen some government proposals in some other Caribbean countries where you can have a water harvesting project, because everybody knows water harvesting is part of climate smart agriculture. So you have a big water harvesting project and making the same type of mistakes that the World Bank always made in thinking that you can have an irrigation project. There's no such thing as an irrigation project. There's a water management project. Because having harvested all this water from whichever source, you then go to provide it to farmers who are using agri-chemicals who are then going to go and pollute your water resource further down the line. So part of the thinking in this was, how do I find categories of compliance that are mutually supportive and that I have intentionally given equal status. This is one of the major comments I got from the reviewers of the proposal. Why are you giving all these categories equal consideration? One, to force the holistic approach, and two, because of the way it's crafted, and I have to take the credit for that, the way it's crafted, some of them are mutually enforcing. So even though when I discuss it, I may talk about land clearing under a biodiversity heading, land clearing also comes up under resource utilization heading. So that you find it cancels out eventually, at least in the one project that I've actually reviewed, that actually came up with a C-SAC rate. So let me just give it to you in a nutshell. So I have these 5 categories of compliance, where I say I'm looking at resource conservation. resource conservation, energy use. You know, every time we talk about climate change, it's always about energy use and fossil fuel use, etc. Safety, which is an aspect that tends to be missing from a lot of the concerns, and it is part of my whole bugbear, my whole soapbox about food security. Because a lot of the things that are passing as food, not only is it safe, they're nutritious either. So that we shouldn't really be giving it equal weight to genuine safe food. Biodiversity support and greenhouse gas reduction. Now, I'm telling you all of this in a script, but each of the categories are further subdivided like this. You have these 5 major categories. You have 4 subdivisions, each of them, and each is worth 5 points on the C-SAC scale. So, if you were to score 5 points in each of the 20 possible areas for awarding of points, you will end up with an overall rating of 100 points. If you couldn't muster up 40 points, in other words, if you couldn't have a 2-point rating in each of the categories, then it's not really a climate smart project. We shouldn't even be talking to you. If it's between 40 and 49 points, that's a C-SAC level 1 level of certification. If you look at the program, you'll see the actual C-SAC designation, which is the trademark stamp that will go onto the project, the product or the process. A level 2 C-SAC certification will be 50 to 59 points. Level 3 will be 60 to 69 points. Level 4 will be 70 to 79. And level 5 will be 80 to 100. Now, as we talk about it a little more, you realize that it is going to be extremely difficult to accidentally craft a C-SAC 3 or 4 level project. Forget 5, a 3 or 4 level project. Because if you are focused only on water harvesting or only on greenhouse gas reduction, you're going to find yourself in a bind. You may get the full 20 points for that section, but then have such poor land use, have such poor safety, have such poor management of biodiversity that you fall aside and you end up with 40 points and don't even make, well, 39 points, sorry, and don't even make the overall C-SAC certification as being authentic, in my view, authentic climate smart agriculture. So let me just quickly go through the categories and what are some of the things discussed in them. Under resource conservation, I've looked at land, water, nutrients, and labor. I know there are a lot of people in the human resource people who say, hey, you shouldn't be talking about people as a resource, but the reality is that when you're looking at input and resources to be used, and labor is part of it. And that's where I get to sneak in some of my other, more socialist ideas, so that, in the same way that Green Globe gives you extra award of points for having sourced your labor within the community. So if you look at hotels with a Green Globe certification, they're hiring from within the community. You're not bringing in a whole set of expats from wherever else, and that type of thing. Under energy use, I've looked at power, lighting, input manufacture, because I am really wary of these climate smart agriculture projects that look fancy on the outside, but when you look at all the inputs have been manufactured using fossil fuels, the same thing that we are allegedly trying to get rid of. And transportation. Under safety, I've looked at the production operations, harvesting, storage, and utilization. So that way I get to, again, my little socialist tendencies, I get to throw in a little bit of nutrition argument into the utilization. So under biodiversity support, which I know will be clear to the hearts of the niches and the carols in the room. Land clearing. So what's the good of having a major water harvesting project when the original land clearing is on a watershed? I mean, I'm not just making this stuff up. Trust me, you can't make this stuff up. There are actual proposals like that. Where fellas will go in there, cut down a watershed, to have a water harvesting project because they're going to divert some river from somewhere, something crazy like that. And I've been given new bona fides to talk about the water industry because I recently did the strategic plan for Nawasa, which is the water company in Grenada, and I was able to drum home to the board and the management the importance, the climate change significance of water management at a national and regional level. Off-site agrochemical aspects. What happens, it's one thing to see is supported by biodiversity here, there, and everywhere, but limits to the introduction of invasive species. Because although I haven't specifically mentioned GMOs or the like, I'm in full recognition that some of the adaptations that we're going to have to use are going to be genetically modified. There are going to be halophytic and xerophytic modifications that we need to survive. So I'm not on a total organic crusade there. And then ecosystem services impact. And this is a term that I like. I mean, Carl will know that on the Israelite board, I am allegedly, supposedly, and not very effectively the head of the Sustainable Development Chair, but the committee, because really we need to be selling some of these services. John Agard has been able to put together some of the economics of it in terms of how much an acre of forest is worth. An acre of forest at a particular elevation is worth something to people living in a remote. Because we know what happens when you clear. We know how much water comes down, we know how much damage you can have, etc., etc., etc. So that's part of the overall thinking. And then in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, I look at enteric fermentation, your ruminants belching up the place. Soil management, so again another way to tackle land. So that's where I'm saying, although the point scale is equitable, seems equal, but it's equitable in the long run. I look at fossil fuel use, project-wide, and I look at manure and waste management. And under waste, I'm taking byproducts, improperly harvested products, because at the key of C-SAC is the manual. The part that I haven't shared with you is the actual manual that says how you're going to now ascribe a scale, a numeric output for a question, an answer to a question based on these particular categories. I really just wanted to give you the antecedents, because a real examination of the tool, will require you looking at the document that you may or may not have seen. But I just want to leave with a couple of statements. Having come up with this scale, having come up with a points awarding scheme that can be used by people without an agriculture background. When you see the manual lists answers to specific questions in terms of land credit. What it does is it forces anyone submitting a project to actually go checklist-wise down each of these concerns. So if you were developing a water harvesting project and you didn't think about fossil fuel use at all, you have to know, because that is going to be one of the areas that is going to come down with the checklist. No other reason, one of the reasons why I'm proud of this tool is that it forces project developers, project fabricators like myself, and project analysts to go down in checklist fashion into each of these categories and see where does this project, process, or product fall into the overall scheme of things.